Companion makes are usually created to expand an existing brand into new markets. But Ford has a history of creating new brands to expand existing models into existing markets. Take the short-lived Merkur brand, for example. In the mid-80s, Ford wanted to take advantage of the growing popularity of European imports. And since the Ford Capri was one of the most successful imports of the 1970s, they felt they could repeat that success by importing existing European Ford models. But instead of taking a European Ford and selling it as an American Ford, or as a Mercury, they opted to create a new brand to stress the car's German origins, using the German word for Mercury, Merkur, starting in 1985 and using existing Lincoln Mercury dealers. Both the Ford Scorpio and Sierra XR4i would be imported under the new brand name. The Scorpio was 186 inches long on a 109-inch wheelbase, weighing 3,200 pounds. Power came from a 2.9-liter V6 with 144 horsepower, and either a 5-speed manual or a 4-speed automatic. It was marketed as an entry-level premium sedan, or hatchback in this case, and prices started at just over $23,000, close to Lincoln territory at the time. The Sierra was 178 inches long on a 103-inch wheelbase, costing less than $17,000 to start. Naturally, they had to be adapted to meet U.S. safety and emissions regulations, which meant the Sierra gained nearly 300 pounds, pushing it up to about 3,000 pounds. To compensate, it gained a turbo, making it the Merkur XR4Ti, as GMC had claimed the Sierra name in the U.S., and Oldsmobile was using it with alternate spelling as the Cutlass Sierra. It produced 145 horsepower with the automatic and 175 horsepower with the 5-speed manual, and could do 60 in just over 7 seconds, do the quarter mile in 15.5 seconds, and exceed 130 miles an hour. Just over 42,000 XR4Tis would be sold, and less than 7,500 Scorpios, meaning Merkur only made it to 1989 before being killed off, not even managing half the sales of the shorter-lived Edsel brand. Clearly, this was not the first time Ford created a new brand for questionable reasons. In 1946, Ford introduced the Monarch brand in Canada, essentially a Mercury with its own distinct trim, which meant a 202-inch long car on a 118-inch wheelbase, with a 100-horsepower 3.9-liter V8. Then it would be restyled in 1949, like its Mercury counterpart, getting 5 inches longer and a bigger 4.2-liter V8 with 110 horsepower, when it would be joined by the Meteor brand, a Ford that was trimmed like a Mercury, including the Mercury grille. But unlike Ford, it was only offered with the V8, the 3.9-liter 100-horsepower version. The Meteor would share its 197-inch length and 114-inch wheelbase and its trim levels with Ford, while Monarch would use its own trim levels. In the 1952 restyle, Meteors started using Mercury dashes and instrumentation to make them more distinct from the Fords, now on a 115-inch wheelbase and 198 inches long, with the 3.9-liter V8 being up to 110 horsepower. And of course the Monarchs were also restyled that year, like all the other Ford products, with horsepower being up to 125 for the year. And this trend would continue on for at least a couple of years. But starting in 1954, Meteors would start getting unique trim levels from Ford, with names such as Niagara and Rideau, although base models would return to Ford interior trim. Like Ford and Mercury, Meteor and Monarch moved from the Ford flathead V8 to a new overhead valve design for 1955. For the Meteor, that meant a 4.5-liter with 162 to 182 horsepower, while the Monarch was now on a 119-inch wheelbase, was 206 inches long, and used a 4.8-liter with 185 to 195 horsepower. Starting in 1956, Meteor would get 6-cylinder models, and they would start getting versions of special Ford models, such as the Crown Victoria, and in 1957, their own version of the Ranchero. But 1957 would be the last year of the Monarch, as it would be replaced in the market by Edsel, which was the brainchild of Henry Ford II, named in honor of his father, Edsel Ford. Unlike Monarch and Meteor, Edsel was not a Canada-specific brand, but what it was built on existing Ford and Mercury models, intended to fit between those two brands, with the 116-inch wheelbase Ford-based Roundup, Villager, and Bermuda wagons, as well as the Ranger and Pacer sharing its 118-inch wheelbase with the Ford Fairlane, and the bigger 124-inch wheelbase Corsair and Citation with correlating Mercury models, the Monterey and Montclair. Although styling was distinct, inside and out, from its horse-collar grille to its unique instrumentation, to its available teletouch push-button automatic controls in the center of the steering wheel. Engines included a 5.4-liter with 232 horsepower, a 5.9-liter with 303 horsepower, and a 6.7-liter with 280 to 345 horsepower. They sold just over 63,000 in the U.S. and nearly 5,000 in Canada. Not as many as expected, but not bad for an all-new brand, particularly considering the recession. But things would go downhill quickly. With the updated styling of 1959, the interior would become more like a Ford, losing most of Edsall's unique features. The Pacer, Citation, Roundup, and Bermuda packages were all dropped, as all models moved to Ford's new 120-inch wheelbase. And U.S. sales fell below 45,000, and Canada's sales to 2,500. Perhaps making matters worse, Edsall didn't get a version of Ford's new upmarket Galaxy, hurting Edsall's image as being a step up from Ford, which even Meteor got a version of as the Montcalm. And the Monarch returned to Canada that year, increasing competition there. Edsall took an even bigger hit in 1960, becoming nothing more than a mildly restyled Ford, offered only in Ranger and Villager wagon. And Edsall would be killed off as a loss after fewer than 3,000 1960 models would be made. Monarch would also be killed off again after 1960, and 1961 would be the last year of the Ford-based Meteors. But the Meteor name would carry on, as Mercury's new mid-sized model, an upgrade to Ford's new Fairlane. As such, it was on a 1-inch longer wheelbase, at least the first year, and engines included a 2.8-liter inline-six with 101 horsepower, and V8s of 3.6 liters with 145 horsepower, and 4.3-liter with 164 horsepower. Its second year, it moved to the Fairlane's wheelbase, but it never really established its place in the market, only lasting through its second model year, to return as a brand in Canada once again for 1964. Where previous Meteors were Fords with Mercury trim, the 64 model was a Mercury Monterey with a Ford interior. But the old system returned in 1965, with the old model names on the new Ford Galaxy, with Mercury-style trim, and this would carry on through 1968. Starting in 1969, the cars would get both Mercury and Meteor badging, making the brand Mercury Meteor, not confusing the issue at all, something that would continue until 1977. And Mercury would introduce a luxury compact in 1975, reviving the Monarch name as a model on a dressed-up version of the new Ford Granada, which lasted through 1980. Starting in 1977, the Mercury Meteor Rideau was replaced by the Mercury Marquis Meteor, with Meteor being dropped from the name after 1981, putting an end to both the brand and model, which begs the question of why they existed in the first place. Well, there were a number of reasons why American brands were marketing cars differently in Canada, not the least of which were related to unique regulations and tariffs related to domestic content, which helped to create a number of Canada-specific vehicles, ranging from things like a Chevy Chevelle badged as a Pontiac Beaumont, and the Chevy 2 as the Pontiac Acadian, the M100 series of Mercury-branded Ford pickups, and Plymouth-bodied Dodges, or Plodges. But for some reason, Ford opted to take things to another level, creating Fords that weren't exactly Fords, or Mercuries, at least for a few decades. As always, thanks for watching. Don't forget to comment below, and like and subscribe.